theater. I'm glad that I'm able to have him here in studio. So I believe Dr. Terrence Roehrig is around the corner. Thanks for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Professor, I appreciate it. So you just heard from Bob Whitcomb what he's hoping maybe to hear from you, and we'll kick off with that. Now, we've spoken about any number of issues, and here we are now in June. And again, 6 months into the Trump administration, you just were over there, and you were in South Korea, and I maybe kind of want to kick off with that before I go in to see what Bob wants. What's the tenor over there currently as it pertains to North Korea and North Korea's relations with the U.S.?
Sure. I think first and foremost, we have a new administration in place in South Korea. They just completed a special election to fill the post after their previous president was impeached. And so everyone is looking first to see how that administration evolves. It had talked initially about possibly engaging the North, perhaps moving away from the current administration's policy of pressure on the North, but we are starting to see them not go quite that far and say pressure, sanctions still are important. We will talk if that is appropriate, but likely not for the time being. So to see how that takes shape, but then secondly, to see how the new South Korean administration interacts with the Trump administration. As I think because of the impeachment process, South Koreans have felt they've been a bit out of the loop in regards to dealing with North Korea. It has been largely a China-United States show up to this point. And so I think they are very anxious to get back in that process. And in particular, at the end of June, there's plans in place to have a summit meeting. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in is going to be coming to Washington. The representative is already here starting to plan some of these things. So it will be interesting to see how the two administrations work together, personally how they connect. Policy-wise, I think while there was concern that there was going to be a lot more space between the two, I think there is much more optimism now that U.S.-South Korean approach to North Korea is not going to be that different.
Now, why do you think that happened with the sort of reversal of this new South Korean administration? Because the last time we had talked, you had mentioned that facet that they were open to sort of more communication with North Korea. And as you just mentioned, the sort of pulling back and going and looking more at the sanctions once again. Why do you think that shifted?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One, I think certainly as we see in our elections as well, that you can campaign and say certain things during a campaign, but when you're actually governing, you have different restrictions and you're constrained by what has been done in the past and by the international environment. And South Korea has done a lot to craft a strong international consensus on placing pressure and sanctions on North Korea. And I think that's hard to change some of those things. But I think also North Korea, while it was somewhat restrained prior to the election, in particular, I think North Korea, we were all expecting North Korea to conduct a sixth nuclear test, and it has not done so. Now, why? It's still hard to know, but I think one key reason is they did not want to test right before the election and perhaps sway the election results. But after Moon Jae-in has been elected, they've now tested 2 ballistic missiles. And so how do you go back and try to reach out to the North when the North Korean behavior hasn't changed all that much? And so I think you are going to see a much more moderate Moon Jae-in, and again, much more likely to see collaboration between the United States and South Korea, which I think is tremendously important.
And one of the questions that Bob said he wants to hear from you this evening, again, going back to North Korea, testing those capabilities, always trying to get that nuclear capabilities. Do you see a time frame on their ability to do so?
That's hard to say exactly what that time frame is. It could be a couple of years. They may be very close now. It's difficult to know for sure, but they are going to keep trying, testing ballistic missiles. They may conduct another nuclear test. The other key piece is being able to mate those two capabilities, to be able to put a nuclear warhead on a ballistic missile. That's not an easy capability to do, and we're not certain the North Koreans can do that, but they're likely getting closer. But they will continue to test, and I think for 2 key reasons. One, They need to make sure that these things work, and every time they test, they learn a little bit more, they get a little bit better at it. But also they're trying to make a statement to the United States, to South Korea, that we have this capability, we're getting close, therefore do not try to do anything to intimidate us or to impose some sort of regime change operation on us.
And so what happens in your estimation every time North Korea says, we've got it, we're going to do it, and then falls flat on their face? How do you think they perceive that? You know, they think they're going to come out with a big show of force, and then sometimes it hasn't yet happened.
Sure. And that's interesting. When you look at some of the missile tests, they had a few tests the past year or so that failed. And so there was a story came out in the New York Times in, I think, March or February, that perhaps this was the result of a secret U.S. cyber operation that was able to hack into North Korean systems, perhaps like what occurred to Iran in the Stuxnet story. But lately they've had a couple of successful missile tests. And so I think there's still a lot of question about that supposed cyber operation and how successful that was. So they've had a couple of successful missile tests that again show that they are continuing to make progress.
And what have you seen from the Trump administration in recent weeks? You know, there's been obviously a lot of focus from his administration on the Russian side of things, but you know, when things would heat up, we'd see him mention. What have we seen out of them in very recent weeks, or has it just been very quiet?
I think it has been relatively quiet and sort of moving back towards a position that is not unlike what the Obama administration had. And I think the key piece here is that, of course, any administration that comes in is going to look at the previous one, re-examine policies, argue at least up front that we can do better. But in the North Korean case, there just aren't many good options. And many administrations have wrestled with this. And you certainly heard a lot more discussion during the early months of the Trump administration about military force. But there are extreme dangers and risks with military actions, and I think you are seeing them sort of move back from that. That indicates the Trump administration is perhaps putting a greater priority on the North Korean problem. And in discussions that I had with South Koreans 2 weeks ago, they were very happy to see that Trump seemed to be elevating the North Korean problem as a much higher priority. But I think you will find that in the months ahead, he will find out there just aren't all that many good options. And it's going to come back to sanctions and pressure. But it's not clear that's going to solve this problem as well. I think one of the key things to look at here is you hear many people talk about the North Korean issue as a problem to be solved. I think we are getting to the point where this problem may not be able to be solved, and it's going to be about managing this problem so that we can bring tension levels down and we don't start a war on the Korean Peninsula.
And let's talk a little bit about China's role. We've talked about this. Have there been any changes there?
Not really. I mean, there are some indications that China has imposed a higher, tighter level of sanctions, but I think the jury is still out of the degree to which China is willing to do that. And I have to say I remain skeptical that China is willing to impose the kind of pressure that might get the North Koreans to change in regards to denuclearizing. I think that is very difficult, and the North Koreans have shown they are willing to tolerate a lot of pressure. How much would it take for them to give up their nuclear weapons? I don't know that the Chinese are willing to go that far to do so.
And that, as you talk about the denuclearization, is that an ultimate goal of the United States administration, to see that they don't even have that arsenal?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that is one thing that most of the players agree across the board, that denuclearization is the goal. A couple of things, again, that I heard reinforced in my discussions with various people in South Korea is that there is slowly a willingness or a recognition that we can't get from here to denuclearization in one step. Mm-hmm. We're probably going to have some sort of interim freeze on perhaps their nuclear arsenal or perhaps on testing. We also may have to have dialogue in some way to get to some of those particular steps, but key that it's going to have to be some sort of interim agreement to be able to get to that. But denuclearization remains the key. piece. I think one of the other interesting proposals that I heard from a think tank group that I had discussions with, that somehow we have to be able to convince or have North Korea see that they have an option or a choice between denuclearization and survival, and that we have to be able to convince them that denuclearization is in their interest. But I think that is a long bridge to get to, and I'm not optimistic in the future to achieve that.
Can there ever be U.S.-North Korean diplomatic relations of any significance?
Certainly there can be, and that is one of the carrots that is out there possibly for an improved relationship. Some of the others that you hear discussed is a peace treaty, because there is technically only an armistice in place, which is a ceasefire to end the Korean War, normal relations, a security guarantee. But what will North Korea be willing to give up in return for that? We have a long way to go before we can reach those, but those are some of the different incentives that could be part of this. But the other key piece to that is domestic politics in the United States and South Korea as well. To provide concessions to North Korea is going to be a very difficult thing for any administration to do, because it is going to be viewed as appeasement, as giving in to North Korean bad behavior, and that is going to be very difficult for any administration to do.
What would concessions even look like?
Well, the three that I mentioned could be from a North Korean perspective or from
the U.S. giving concessions.
Right. It may be one of those three. Another element might be an aid package. But some negotiators would argue that we've already offered those things to North Korea and they have not been interested. And I think that's a key piece to this, that you talk about engagement. Is North Korea really interested in this point at having those talks? I think we need to continue trying. I think engagement and dialogue is not necessarily a bad thing. We have to be careful in how we do it. I think we should not be giving away the store in return for that. But I think we have to keep trying, if for no other reason, to lower tension levels on the peninsula, because every spring we get to this point where, oh my gosh, it's April, it must be time for war on the Korean Peninsula. We have to try to be able to get away from that, but of course it takes North Korea to be willing to do that as well as the United States and the South, and that's going to be a difficult goal to reach.
Is there anything we didn't touch upon that you're going to be talking about tonight?
Well, in regards to policy, I think, again, the key thing is going to be seeing how the Trump administration and the Moon Jae-in administration are able to bridge what at least appeared to be some gaps that I think are coming closer together, the personal relationships that are part of this. And I guess I would like to end on a theme that I'm going to mention a few times tonight, and that is the notion of managing this problem versus solving it. The United States and others can't solve every international problem that is out there. And I think this may be one of them, and we may have to start thinking more in terms of managing this problem as opposed to solving it. But we cannot give up on the goal of denuclearization, because that has a number of key elements to it that if we give up on that, I think that's a mistake.
So I appreciate your coming in, sharing with folks your expertise. You know, it's June. What do you have on tap for yourself this summer? Are you teaching classes, taking a break? What's going on?
Well, I have a lot of writing to do. I have some writing projects to finish. I'm also going to be going back to Korea in about a week or two, again for another trip. So,
you must have some good frequent flyer miles.
Well, it does. Those are the trips that build up, that get you status.
Get some perks. And what will you be looking for? Do you think we'll hear anything definitive out of this U.S.-South Korea meeting later this month? Or do you think it'll sort of just be behind more closed doors and we won't get that much intel?
Well, it's hard to say, but I think the other element of this that is an important piece for the alliance is not only North Korea. I mean, that's one piece to this. But the Trump administration has raised a couple of other things. One, President Trump has said that he doesn't think the Korea-U.S. free trade agreement is a good deal for the United States. That has raised concerns in South Korea. He has also raised some burden sharing issues in regards to the alliance, that he has said in regards to Japan and South Korea that they should pay more That concerns South Koreans as well. And then lastly, you may have seen a number of things on the news lately about the THAAD issue, the anti-missile battery. Trump suggested that perhaps South Korea should pay the $1 billion that it would cost to bring this over. And that was not the original deal, and South Koreans are concerned about that. So they're very interested in getting some clarification on some of these issues. The alliance is much more than just North Korea. And so I think these will all be parts of the discussion as well, but we shall see.
Keep an eye on those. Well, I appreciate you raising all the points to keep an eye on the Korean Peninsula, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Dr. Roehrig, I appreciate
My
it.
pleasure.
Enjoy the talk this evening.
Thank you very much.
I'll let you take off. Enjoy. The sun's coming back out. It's all good. It's nice to see that orb in the sky. Dr. Terrence Roehrig from the Naval War College, as I mentioned, an expert on the Korean Peninsula, was just over there, is going back to South Korea. Always good to be able to pick his brain about U.S.-Korean relations, raise some interesting points about not solving the North Korean problem, but looking to manage it, as well as some other things as well. So great having him here in studio. As we've interviewed on the phone, talked to him over Skype, but he is here for the Providence Committee on Foreign Relations with Bob Whitcomb this evening. So they're going to take off for that. I'm sure we will be talking to him soon.